Okay, aloha and welcome to Building an Effective Relationship with Your Mentor. My name is Kristen Connors, and I am the Fellowship, Scholarship, and Professional Development Coordinator in Graduate Division. I'll be moderating today's session. In this presentation, we'll learn about the value mentors play in our graduate student career and how to cultivate that relationship. With that said, I would now like to turn things over to our presenter, Dr. Jairus Grove. Dr. Grove?
Great, thanks so much. And thanks again for having me. It's always nice to be able to have first contact with students. All right, so I'm sure you've been told this a million times, but first, welcome. We're really excited to have you on the campus and excited that you can start the year on the campus, which is, baby steps, some progress. Today, I'm going to talk to you about what I think is probably, after the actual content of your classes and your expertise, one of the most important things you do while you're in graduate school, which is developing a mentorship relationship so that you can build the kinds of skills that you need to go and be a researcher or to be a professor or whatever it is you choose to do with your degree. I think mentorship is really one of the most essential things that you do in graduate school, and it's the reason why people want to go to graduate school, as opposed to, at this point in time, going on Wikipedia and learning everything about, I don't know, redox equations or something else. Like, you could find anything you want on the internet in terms of data and information, but what you can't get is mentorship. So first things first, because it's the beginning. Don't panic. This is my best advice to people who are starting graduate school. There's a tendency to just completely freak out and think, oh my gosh, it's already the first week. I haven't published anything yet. I haven't found a mentor yet. I don't know where any of my classes are. I'm not even sure I'm allowed to leave the dorm yet because I had some mix up at the airport with my vaccine card. Don't freak out. I think it's really important at the beginning of the process that you really take a minute, take a breath, and look around. It's a beautiful campus. It's an incredibly welcoming intellectual community. You can't possibly be behind already. So take a minute for yourself to kind of start to get to know things and figure things out. And I actually think that's a good philosophy of your first semester. Some of you have very strict requirements and you need to start off taking very particular classes. Some of you don't, but almost all of you have a little bit of freedom to kind of explore. And so my sort of words of, I've been here for 10 years and I was in graduate school for 5 years before that, wisdom is to say that graduate education is an amazing opportunity to figure out what it is you want to do with the rest of your life and what kinds of ideas you want to explore. But it's also a really good time to reevaluate the presumptions or the assumptions that you have about what those things are going to be. So don't so commit yourself to where you thought you were supposed to be that you don't take advantage of the fact that we have such an incredibly rich and diverse campus. These were my mentors. This is Jane Bennett and Bill Conley. And pretty much everything I have to say today is from learning from them and the ways in which I think they helped make me a confident and an effective faculty member. And I say faculty member as opposed to researcher or professor because I think one of the things that your mentor really does is try to help you figure out that whole package, right? How to put together the really hard parts of research with the really important parts of communicating that research, with the really oftentimes complex parts of doing that within a community of researchers. It'll be your department, and then all the steps along the way. This was 8 years after I had graduated. My book, which was one of the ones on the right, was being presented with an award at the American Political Science Association, and I was sick and couldn't go. And so my advisors, after 8 years after I graduated, went and took a photo with it to send me to cheer me up. That's what you're looking for with a mentorship. It's a lifelong intellectual partnership, and it's something that I think for many people is what they remember most fondly from graduate school, more than the things that they learned. They remember the people who helped them get there. So I'm going to try to tell you about the things I think made them awesome. So first question, however, why do you need a mentor? There are plenty of self-starting people who think, I don't need a mentor. I didn't ever really use my advisor as an undergrad. I was really smart, got great grades. Why do I need another advisor? Well, I think a mentor is something more than that. So I'm going to go through the reasons why you should really take this seriously and try to find the best person you can. And the first part is navigation. No matter how good our orientation sessions are, no matter how much I tell you during this session, you learn in every other session, it's still going to be difficult to navigate the campus and the beginning of your graduate degree. However, your mentors, your advisors, they've been here a long time. Even the ones who have only been here for 2 years have been here 2 years longer than you have. They know where the buildings are. They know the quirks about getting your student ID. They can help you figure out why it is that, in my case, when I first got here, and I actually needed a mentor when I became a faculty member, the UH system refused to believe I was a professor and would not let me out of the student data system. And so every semester for the first year and a half I was here, I literally had to get permission to use my La Lima account to give my students things because I wasn't authorized as a student. It makes no sense. But there are these quirks in any large system. And if it hadn't have been for the people who've helped me along in our department, I would have never gotten through it. So getting started, that's the reason you need to really think about finding a mentor. The second is intellectual life. I mean, this is a campus of ideas, right? This isn't just a professional school where we're going to tell you the brute facts you need to know to pass some, licensing exam and then you're on your own. We make ideas here. We don't just transmit ideas. We create the knowledge that we teach one another. And your mentors are the best way to get into that experience. Like, what are the different ways that you can think about becoming part of, the research that it is you want to do? 3, professionalization. This one, I think most people don't think about when they're in graduate school, but you very quickly discover that if you didn't think about it in graduate school, you have to think about it immediately on the job market. And that's how to become a colleague. And this is actually, I think this is difficult for a lot of people, particularly if you went to a large state school as an undergrad and you didn't have a lot of one-to-one contact with faculty, or different intellectual cultures. I've taught and worked in South Korea before and in Japan, and there are very different norms in terms of how students and faculty interact. And I think one of the things that's really important about the kind of American academic system is that we're peers. Right? You have a lot to learn from us as faculty, but you're no longer an undergraduate that needs to wait until you're called on. Now is the time that you develop a peer relationship with faculty members, and that you figure out what that means for kind of protocols of both being respectful, but also being able to challenge intellectually those you're learning from. And that's what being a colleague is about. When you become colleagues in a department, what's most important is that you learn an effective means of conversation so that you can be constructively critical of one another, so you can learn from one another, and so you can collaborate, right? So that you can build the opportunities to write grants together or publish articles together or build art projects together. That kind of collaboration, I think, is really important. And it's very different than making a friend or having a favorite teacher. It's about building a kind of both respect, right, that everyone's making an intellectual contribution, but then also trust, right, that you can share your ideas with somebody. And that professionalization, I think, takes some practice. And the last big sort of core of it is sort of the last stage of navigation, which is how do you get out of the program? I loved graduate school and I loved my department. As you can see, I still love my advisors. In fact, they still come to visit in Hawaii frequently, and I visit them in Baltimore. But as one of them very kindly told me, about 3 years into the program, that being a graduate student was in fact not a job, and they could tell I loved it too much. And so I needed to start thinking about how I was going to get out of it, which is why it took me 5 years. So it's important that you have a good mentor, and I'm going to talk about this more in depth because it's actually not a straightforward process how one takes your degree and your expertise and you translate that into a career or a vocation, a calling of a particular kind of career that you want to do. And generally speaking, your mentors are the ones who have really those skills in a way that will become meaningful. So the first is that exiting sort of navigation is that you're going to have a committee. If you're a master's student, it might be just a committee of 3. If you're a PhD student, it's going to be a committee of 5. And you need a kind of representative, right? Somebody who's going to, be your advocate. And that's actually true through your whole career. But it's most true when you're in the department that you're going to be in as a student, and you're not necessarily at the faculty meeting when they're going to discuss your funding, or you're not necessarily in the room when they're discussing how you're doing, making progress on your dissertation, or what your dissertation's about, or why your master's thesis is an original contribution. That's what your mentor does, right? They get to be that sort of representative for you, and in so doing, make sure that everyone knows the best version of you. And so committee management's important. The second is dissertation theses and defenses. These are not straightforward processes. I recommend everyone go and look at McSweeney's recommendations for dissertation defense. It's a comedic website that's run by academics. And it's great because in the suggested sort of FAQs on how to prepare for the dissertation, it says to prepare for the snake portion of your dissertation. And of course they're joking, but the reality is, like, it's kind of an opaque box. Like, you've never defended a dissertation before. You've never defended a master's thesis before. And there are all kinds of things that vary from department to department, from field to field, discipline to discipline, about what is expected in terms of how you put your presentation together, how you present it, how long you speak for, whether or not you should wait and listen to all of the questions and critiques from your committee members before you start in, or whether or not you should answer the questions in a kind of more direct way. Those kinds of protocols are something that your advisors and your mentors are really going to help you get through. And as that's your ultimate goal, right? You need to produce this original piece of research, or this culminating experience where you get something distinctive and singular out of your degree program. That's something that you're really going to want assistance for. And the last part, which I've mentioned, is job prep, which for me and my students starts on day one. It starts with learning how to do public speaking, how to communicate your ideas clearly in casual conversation, so that when you're in your job interview, you remember to do things like, this is one of the things I always tell my students, ask them questions too. There's sort of nothing more embarrassing and less interesting than when a job candidate shows up and they're so nervous and they're so intent on telling you everything about their dissertation that they never ask you anything. When half of hiring someone for an academic job is figuring out if you would want to have lunch with them, or if you would want to be in the same department with them for 25 years. So that those kinds of things, which you don't think about when you're going through an experience the first time, that's the kind of wisdom that you want to try to draw on from your mentor. So next, how do you pick a mentor? This one I think is hard for people because it's sort of the opposite of how you picked a graduate program. So you probably picked a graduate program because you went through the faculty list and you said, wow, who's really famous? Or who's cited a lot, or who had that really cool idea, or wrote that amazing book on, I don't know, Chamorro poetry, or who, figured out how to use survey data to really understand the effects of climate change on atoll, ecosystems. But the reality is, fit is more important than the kind of prestige of your faculty member. Sometimes those coincide, but ultimately you're going to get a job not because of your sort of professor's fame that they can kind of dole out, which is I think what most of us believe, but it's probably kind of 1950s version of the academy that doesn't exist anymore. You're going to get a good job because you were prepared to go on the job market. You were prepared to write the best work that you could publish. You were prepared to give the best kind of presentation of that work. You were prepared to show yourself as a good colleague, even in very brief encounters. And those kinds of things come from fit, not from how famous a professor is. And fit really is a kind of strange thing. It's really about chemistry, right? So do you communicate clearly to one another? Do you trust one another? Do you feel comfortable around them? And this is the time where I sort of make this proviso, which is that you should never work with somebody that you don't feel comfortable around. And if you don't feel comfortable around them, and there's a good reason, meaning it's not something you've done, but you feel like it's their bias, or there's just particular kinds of students that they want to work with, and you notice they're all dudes, or you notice that none of them aren't of a particular racial identification. then that's not good, right? That's the kind of thing that you want to avoid. And I don't think that that's like a major problem on our campus, but students should feel empowered to make those kinds of judgments, right? Am I being treated fairly? And that's something I'll say, if that becomes an issue, that's what chairs are for, and that's what grad chairs are for. Because sometimes faculty members need to remember that, they need to make extra effort to make sure that people feel welcome. But even then, sometimes a fit isn't a good fit. And my suggestion is move on. Don't try to make something fit that doesn't fit. That's even true if the expertise overlap isn't perfect. Now, I think that's probably a little easier for the social sciences and humanities and the arts than it is for the sciences, because sometimes expertise is really important. If you're doing statistical genetics, then you're probably not going to sort of randomly tap the shoulder of a botanist and be like, hey, could you be my advisor, even though you do something totally different. Right? A zoologist who doesn't even think about genetics and thinks about animal ethology is probably not going to be the perfect fit. But don't think that because someone works on exactly what you want to work on, that equates to fit. Again, what you want to see is, what was that classroom experience like? Did you get great feedback on what you did in the laboratory or in a paper? Were you able to show up to office hours and feel like you could sit for a while and really discuss things? Or did it seem like they were too busy doing something else? And those kinds of things, I think, are actually more important. A track record for working with students. I think this one is probably one of the most important. And this is the kind of thing that honestly is hard to do when you're a new student. You're like, well, how do I know if they have a track record of working with students? Well, one way you might know is because their students are out in the world as academics. I think that's actually a pretty good sign. And particularly if they have a lot of students out in the world that you know. But probably the easiest way is ask other graduate students. And I want to say that, and I'm going to get into this a bit more in the next slide, but you want one or two great mentors, but remember, you're joining an intellectual community, not sort of pairing off with one or two people. And so your peer students are really important as a resource, right? They're going to help support you and read a draft you're not ready to show an advisor or mentor. They're going to let you know, when various kinds of funding became available to them and why they thought they got it, so that you can have some insight into the process of, I don't know, getting a SSHRC grant if you're from Canada, or getting a Ford fellowship if that's something that you're eligible for. Those kinds of things, I think, are the things that you want to tap peers for. And it may not just be peers in your department. And so that's a great reason to show up to the GSO or even become part of other sort of graduate student governance organizations. The GSO is Graduate Student Organization. And it's a great way to meet other grad students, even when we're not on campus together. So how to develop a relationship with your mentor. The first one is to take classes. In our department, we actually say that you're not allowed to have a member of your committee that you didn't take a class from. And the reasoning for that is that one conversation is probably not enough to know whether or not you're going to work together. In particular, because being able to communicate and having basic social skills, while definitely a plus, is not indicative that your work makes sense to them in the way that you want to, that they know how to balance for you that very razor's edge between so much criticism that you feel like you can't go forward, or not enough where you feel like you're on your own. And a classroom environment is really a great way to do that, because you're going to do a lot of work together, and you're going to also see how they treat other students. And that's going to tell you a lot about what that future would look like, and whether or not there's enough chemistry fit there that you would want to trust them with your MA or your PhD. You can have more than one mentor. Remember, you have to fill out 5 committee members for a dissertation, probably 3 for a master's thesis. And depending on how you do your culminating experience, you may be doing it in front of the entire faculty, even the other graduate students. So make sure that you're taking some diversity of classes, because likely there aren't 5 people or even 3 people who do exactly what you want to do. So maybe there's somebody who, like if you're in political science, but you're going to want to do certain kinds of qualitative research, you might take a class in sociology. If you're in computer science, but you think that you might want to work in intelligence. And so you need to know a little bit about international politics. And so you might need an outside member on your dissertation. Then come take a class, in Asian studies where people are talking about hacking and, cyber warfare. Those are the kinds of opportunities where you're going to find that university representative, which is actually a requirement of the university, which is that you have one person on your dissertation committee who is not part of your department, who gets to be an outside view on your dissertation as a non-expert to see if you're doing the things that the university as a whole expects. So look for those classes, look for those opportunities. The second is be present. I think that's uniquely hard right now, but it's actually incredibly important. Just because things are online doesn't mean that you shouldn't show up. In fact, kudos for those of you who are here now and aren't just waiting to view it later. If you are waiting to view it later, that's great. But don't make a habit out of that when there are opportunities for Q&A, when there's opportunities to get more information or build the beginnings of a relationship because you were able to ask questions and really discuss material closely. So that's colloquia, that's guest speakers, that's faculty presentations. We're having all kinds of presentations on campus in all kinds of different fields, ranging from, award-winning, best-selling authors all the way to, sort of more humble scholars. And that's a great way to show faculty and to show your peers that you're serious, right? You've joined the intellectual community, you're gonna be part of it. The third is to read their work. It's a lot of work to take on a student, and it's obviously part of our job, but it's only part of our job. And we often have a lot of students. And so I know that, at least for me, that I take a student much more seriously if they know enough about my research that they've actually made a pretty educated judgment about whether or not we should work together, or whether or not we're a good, at least intellectual fit as a sort of starting point, because it shows an investment, right? It shows that you've done extra work. You didn't just show up because, I don't know, I was the first hallway door that you could see open. So read their work, figure out what inspires them, right? What they're interested in. And that'll tell you, at least the beginnings of how you communicate to them that you want to work with them. The last is do the work. So this, most of what we've been talking about is how to sort of begin a mentorship relationship. I think one of the ways to really cultivate a mentor relationship is to make the most out of your mentor's time. There's nothing more frustrating than when a student puts something in front of me that I know they weren't finished with. Meaning, if they had just read through it one more time, they would have caught twice as many typos. They would have realized they hadn't finished parts of the argument, or that they hadn't followed through on the thoughts that they were developing. That to me doesn't show me that they respect my time, because that's work they could have done. You want your mentors to intervene when you've exhausted your capabilities, when you've done the best you can do. That's when you want this person who has more experience to step in, because that's when it's going to make the most difference. Because if I help you get from A to B and you could have gotten to B yourself, then you missed out on me getting you from B to C. Or you came back twice when we could have done it once, and then we missed getting to D, right? We missed that opportunity to push it even further. And when students, I can tell, have really put a lot of work in, I want to put more work into them, right? Because I see them doing that labor. And I think that doesn't mean you don't float ideas with your mentor, or you just do sort of free-form brainstorming. But when you want your mentor to do work, like for instance, if you want your mentor to write a really good recommendation for a grant proposal or a fellowship, when you show up and you have your CV already ready for them, and you've already completed a draft of your statement of purpose, and you've given a draft of, say, what your program proposal is going to be, then it shows me that, wow, okay, this student's really serious about this fellowship. They're not just applying to all the ones they saw were out there, and maybe they won't even finish the application. They're basically done. And what they want is feedback to make that application better. Now I really want to write a recommendation, but more importantly, because I've read, the program statement and the personal statement, and, I've seen the way that the student constructed their CV, I write a much better recommendation. It has more detail. It makes a more persuasive case for why that research is going to have a significant impact. And that's work only you can do. Your advisor can't do that work for you. The next most important one, because it just like, it fills every mentor with joy, is seeing students implement feedback. There's nothing more frustrating than if, it's been 3 semesters of returning papers or returning problem sets, and we've like written copious notes about how to make something better, how to avoid a kind of recurrent error or where else to look. And the student just doesn't do it, right? They keep repeating the same thing. Whereas when we see them making the effort, right, we're excited because it feels like the work we're putting in is paying off. So take the time, right? Take the time to read the feedback, take the time to ask follow-up questions, and take the time to practice and implement the feedback that you get. This is my metaphor for 2021. Why? Because we were supposed to be done with this in 2020, and we're still not done. So this is the part of the section where I say, how do we do this when, again, the Delta variant has ruined all of our best laid plans to start back to the good old days of not having to worry about effects. Also known as, don't worry, this is fine. This is what we were all saying in July, and it's not. It's not even a little bit fine, but we can still have an amazing graduate experience despite it. We just have to learn how to adapt. And I think actually what I hope we're all learning after now 3 semesters of, oh my gosh, don't worry, by the next semester, everything will be back to normal, is that it's never going to be exactly back to normal. But that's not a reason why we can't do something really meaningful with our lives. So how are we going to adapt to a situation that's not going to exactly be what it was before, but can definitely be better? And this is mentor building in contagious times. I think this is more difficult, at least for right now. It's not possible to just, I don't know, have a big orientation where we all sit in a giant room together. I wish that it was. I think that would be a lot easier, but there are still ways that we can make it happen. And the first one is that we have to learn to be patient. I've already gotten probably, I don't know, 35 emails from incoming students because they're so excited to meet. And I'm going to meet every single one of them. But because of current restrictions and because of being safe and being thoughtful, at best, I can meet with each one of them one-on-one. Some of them I really need to meet with online, and pretty soon, probably I'll have to meet with all of them online. And it's going to take a while. So don't assume sort of at the get-go, because you're super nervous, really excited, and you have a tendency when you're super nervous and really excited to think that if someone says, I'm sorry, I'm not available this week, I'd love to make an appointment for next week, your brain immediately says, Rorschach test. What did that statement mean? Oh, it meant they don't like me. They've already evaluated all the other graduate students and they're all better than me. That's not what it means, I promise. It just means that it's going to take a little while. So it's going to go slow, and that's okay. This is where being present really matters. It's easy to be present when you can just hang around in the department. It's harder to be present when we're online. But there are definitely ways to do it. Prepare questions in advance. If there's a paper for a talk that's being given in the department, read the paper ahead of time. Prepare a bunch of good questions. Be ready to follow the conversation. Whether or not that's in the chat box, whether or not it means you can actually unmute and ask the question yourself. But we remember when we get asked good questions. We remember when people came prepared. The same thing is true in class. There's such a huge difference between students who show up to class having done the reading once, having done most of the reading and skimmed it, versus having done the reading and then return to the reading to take notes a second time to find core concepts or major questions, or having reread sections that they struggled with and actually understanding what they're struggling with, meaning why they didn't fully understand what they read. Those kinds of students present themselves, they're present differently in a classroom environment, and those students stand out. Take advantage of everything. That means showing up to things like this. It means showing up to the opportunities to learn how to teach online, which will be offered through the Center for Teaching Excellence. They'll be offered through Graduate Division. They'll be offered through your departments and colleges. There'll be seminars on, how to publish, how to focus on your writing, other things you can take advantage of on campus. Take advantage of all of them. Because you're not going to pick up knowledge in the same sort of casual way that you would if you were just wandering around the halls. Be selective with contact. Some students are very eager and they think they already know who they want their mentor to be. And they think that if they could just email them and meet with them, every single week, that would be the ideal way to get their attention. No, it's actually most important that you have a reason. So at the beginning, of course, the reason is just we need to meet, right? Everyone should make the effort and not feel like they're imposing when they need to meet their assigned advisor, or they want to have a follow-up meeting with someone they think might be their mentor. But after that, make sure that you're using those opportunities for real work that needs to get done or real problems that you're confronting. And the reason why is because it's really hard to be on Zoom all day, and it's just much slower than office hours. So 6 office hour meetings often could happen in an hour and a half because people sort of float in, float out. Some are longer, some are shorter. With Zoom, we block out time and we actually feel a necessity to fill that time. And so by the time we're at our 6th meeting, we may have been on Zoom for 6 hours. So really make sure that you're selective. And that's it. That's my advice. And hopefully that will get you started in this process. I think it can be a little disappointing when you flew halfway around the world to get here that the campus isn't fully open. I can say, I think as faculty, we've learned a lot about what's necessary to get this done, so that we're able to really make this an enriching and full experience for you. I think almost everyone on campus, their classes are hybrid, which means that we may start online or somewhat online, and as numbers improve, we're going to try to get more and more face-to-face contact. You're just going to have to be patient with us and work with us and know that we're putting your safety first, and then we're immediately thinking, how can we use this as an opportunity to do different kinds of learning? So my hope is that you'll find some really innovative strategies in the classroom, even when it's an e-classroom, and then it'll be all that much more exciting when we get to meet together as a group. And that will give us an opportunity to really get to know each other. So thank you all for sitting through half an hour of me yammering about mentorship, and I hope you all have some questions so that we can follow up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grove. It was particularly beneficial to hear how we can navigate the mentoring experience through this transition we're continuing through. So thank you. Let's open up the session now to questions and answers. Attendees, please feel free to type your questions using the Q&A button located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit that anonymously if you feel more comfortable doing it that way, or you can have your name attached. And we do have one question already, which is, what kind of timeline is appropriate for a new graduate student to establish a mentorship?
Oh, well, if you don't already have one, you're in real trouble. No, I'm totally kidding. It's a process. It's not really a timeline. So it would be not great if you graduated without a mentorship, because that would mean that you left without, I think, a key component of what you wanted. But think about it as kind of each semester. So your first semester, you kind of identify a group of people that you think could be great mentors. And by your second semester, you've taken classes with most of them. And so you've really figured out, well, that person's really interesting, but we don't exactly click. This person's interesting and we seem to get along really well. And I really like how they give feedback. I like their teaching style. Or, for me, in that previous picture, one of those people, Jane Bennett, her area of expertise is aesthetics. And the first class I took from her was on poetry, and I'm an expert on warfare. But she was an amazing writer. I loved the way that she wrote. She was such a clear communicator. She just knew how to make very difficult and complex ideas accessible. And that was really important for me. And it didn't matter that I was writing about, improvised explosive devices in Iraq during the Second Gulf War. I could learn a lot from her about the way that we present research and do things. And so then I knew, right? So yeah, first semester, start identifying people who you want to take classes with and taking classes with them. Second semester, you start taking classes with them. It's a great opportunity to start following up. I think if you are in an MA program, by the end of your first year, you really want to feel confident that you're entering your second year with somebody you can work with. If you're in a PhD program, I think similarly, you've got a little bit more flexibility, but by the end of your first year, you want to have a good idea. By the end of your second year as a PhD student, you're likely starting in on your proposal, you're starting to talk about comprehensive exams. That person should really be your chair at that point in time, meaning you don't just feel comfortable with them as a mentor, you feel comfortable with them to steer the ship of your kind of life's research. And again, it shouldn't just be one person. So, keep cultivating those other relationships, right? Sometimes you don't get everything you need from one person. So your chair might be the person who gives really incisive feedback that every time you get it, you have to sleep for 2 days so you can recover from it. But it's just really good, right? Like you're a better student afterwards. And your second reader is the person who says, wow, this is great. I'm so excited after reading this. What do you want to talk about, right? And they want to hear where you think the work needs to go. And maybe you need both of those styles in your life as a scholar. And so you just kind of keep building. So think about it as a process of building. And don't worry if you have to start over, because it happens. People get a year or two in and somebody leaves, or crisis strikes, somebody passes away, somebody retires. It just ends up not working out. You were wrong, right? It's okay. It's a learning process. So it's a process that can start over, that can be iterative. It can happen more than once. But what you want to do is, kind of take stock at the end of each semester where you are, right? Do you have the support network you need? And if you don't have the support network you need and you feel like you're struggling, sometimes you kind of need a mentor's mentor, right? You need the grad chair, and the grad chair's got a ton of experience. You want to say, like, I feel like I'm not finding a mentor, and maybe they have a great idea because they have an outside perspective. Or maybe it's the chair of the department. They know everyone in the department. They know what they work on. They know you because you've been there for a little while. Maybe they can give you some good advice. So don't feel like you're sort of like, you're not on the hunt. And it's not a lonely process, right? Find feedback from others to help that process go along. But just as it comes, don't feel like you're on the clock. But if it's been a year, then that's a good indicator that you need to ask some other people for some help, either grad students or other people.
So Dr. Grove, you've mentioned that it's beneficial to have more than one mentor. How do you manage those multiple relationships with your primary mentor?
I think that's a good question. Like I said, it's really important that you have a mentor and a sort of chair to your dissertation, because they need to manage the committee. If we're going to be very frank, not everyone gets along well. Hopefully everyone gets along professionally, but not every professional relationship is enough to be collegial. So you might ask your advisor, say, oh, I had this great class with this person. I really think they'd be a great committee member. What do you think? And if they suddenly go like, stone-faced, then you probably know maybe they don't get along very well. But most of the time they're going to say, oh yeah, no, I know them. They're great, But I think that's also something you have to work out with your mentor. So sometimes mentors want a kind of final approval on things because it's very important to them that the research that comes out with their name on it reflects a certain kind of standard. For me, it's a community. So what I really want is that every member of the committee is respectful, right? That there are productive differences on the committee as opposed to differences which might prove to be an obstacle for the student. And so I'm very honest with students if I think that there's some kind of chemistry on the committee that isn't really about them and might get in their way. And that's why I said one of the most important things about a mentorship relationship is trust. You need to be able to ask those kind of often blunt questions of your chair and get an honest answer and not feel afraid to do so. So that's actually, it's a pretty good indicator of the kind of the health of your mentorship relationship. If you can't have a hard conversation, then maybe they're an outside reader, maybe they're not your mentor. So that's, I think, a good way to think through it.
Continuing on the topic of, secondary or multiple mentors, do you have any recommendations for how to find a mentor outside of your department or at other universities, organizations, et cetera?
Yeah, I think that's just generally, that's part of professionalization. So I certainly, one of my sort of best mentors in grad school wasn't at my university, but I met them at one of my first conferences. So I think going to conferences and presenting your work, even if you're doing it virtually, is a great way to learn that you have intellectual kinship with other people, right? That they're sort of outside your community. Now, when it comes to finding a university rep, that's a little bit different in the social sciences than it is, I think, in the humanities than it is in the sciences. So, if you're doing like astrophysics, and you're trying to figure out, the nature of dark matter. It's a little harder to be, it can be a little harder to be interdisciplinary, say, with a sociology class on social movements. They don't seem to have a direct connection. So maybe you're not going to take a class. And that might be an instance in which you need to kind of rely on your mentor to tell you, here's some people who've been great university reps in the past. Why don't you try to have coffee with one of them and get to know them? If you're in a more interdisciplinary place, or you're more adventurous, meaning, there are great poets who have been inspired by dark matter and then written poetry about physics, then take a class in another department. It's one of the great opportunities that you're on a campus that you could literally take a class on anything in almost any language. And it could be a really enriching and inspiring opportunity for you. So I think, trying to balance that, right? You can't take a bunch of classes that aren't part of your degree program, particularly if you're an MA student and you're on a slightly tighter timeline. But, there are probably related classes in other departments, which could really give you a radically different perspective. That's why we now have things like biophysics or biochemistry, right? Where we thought there was sort of a division between fields, and now we realize they can learn a lot from one another. So, be on the hunt, go through the course catalog, ask other graduate students, because they have all had to find these people too. And if they've been here longer, they know who's great and who's okay.
And are there any other specific recommendations you would have for master students? As you just mentioned, they are on a shorter time frame for making those connections within the university.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different for MAs, and also it totally differs from mentor to mentor. And it also differs between the experience of that mentor. My partner is also a professor, and it's amazing how instinctively students call me Professor Grove and call her Nicole. And it's irritating, right? People feel more comfortable using the first name of a faculty member if they're a woman, and that's not okay, right? It reflects a certain kind of uneven professionalism. And so I always tell every student, when you first meet someone, ask them what they want to be called. The same way that we'd ask each other, like, what pronoun do we want to use? Or how do we want to engage one another? Like, protocols of encounter are kind of, it's life. And I think that includes, how they want a mentorship relationship to go. And so you should ask that, is this the kind of thing where you want to check in? We want to have, a scheduled meeting every other week, once a month. Is it something that you want to be casual? And again, having that kind of back and forth is a great way to figure out if you're going to be comfortable with them and if they're going to be comfortable with you. And it's also, it shows a maturity to be able to negotiate, which is what's kind of a gray zone, right? When you're an undergrad, you come off kind of torpy if you show up to the office, you're like, hey, John, love that class today. I would have done it a little bit differently. It sounds sort of arrogant. Once you've sort of moving up into MA and PhD, then we know you're trying to make that transition, and we'll work with you on it. So don't be too worried about it. And the other is, you're going to need these people in a professional setting, and you want them to represent you professionally, meaning if they only interact with you as a kind of very distant student, the recommendation is going to reflect that. So I know it can be a bit of a leap of faith, or it can be a little scary to try to encounter and engage faculty as peers. But the best way to do that is to know their work and to be able to ask them challenging questions that they would get asked by a peer, right? So the best way to be a peer is to be a peer. And peers read each other's work. They develop critiques of each other's work. They develop an in-depth knowledge of how their work relates to one another.
Thank you. Now, for some of our students, they'll be starting off fully online this semester. What would be your advice for developing that relationship and making the connection in a virtual space?
Yeah, I think you have to take advantage of everything. So likely your advisor is going to set up an initial meeting. Don't try to cram everything into that first meeting. You will see them again. Just try to use the meeting to get to know each other. Have some questions for them. Don't just, give the spiel that you wrote on your application to try to get in because you're afraid they're going to forget you. Try to develop a conversation. Then remember, you're going to have all these other opportunities because you're going to have class, and likely a bunch of other people are going to show up to class and not say very much, and the faculty member is going to be demoralized. And if you show up to class and you ask good questions, not just lots of questions, but well thought out, in-depth questions, we're going to be excited because it means that you were inspired enough to show up to class ready. And I think that, each one of those fora is really important. And then there's going to be departmental events, right? There's going to be departmental speakers. There's going to be sort of departmental meet and greets. There's going to be all kinds of different things. So, just really take advantage of all the things that you can, even if there's the option that, oh, I guess I don't really have to show up. I could just stream it later. Like if you're confronted with that question and the reason you're streaming it later isn't because someone you care about or take care of needs food, shelter, like there are all kinds of things that are going to make this hard because we're online and some of us are at home and some of us are in other spaces. But if it's just a question of, well, I could just wait till later, then make the effort, commit to being there. And that will put you in a good position.
Thank you. What would be your recommendations, or could you expand more on how do you transition into the colleague identity from mentee?
Yeah, you can't make it happen. You just have to keep doing it. And I wish there were sort of a simple solution, but the reality is it's because of a track record of behavior. And that starts with attendance. And I know that sounds crazy, but we notice when you're not in class. We notice when you're late to class. We notice when you leave early from class. And sometimes you have to do those things. But it's easy to get in the habit because grad school can feel a little less structured than undergrad, right? Like we don't take attendance at the beginning, right? So you don't hear your name called. But we still take attendance, right? It's just that with only 15 people or 20 people in the room, we can tell very quickly if everyone's there. So you want to make sure that, if you are missing, you've got a good explanation. You let us know. You didn't just disappear. I think the other is that it's okay, the sort of rookie mistake is you emailed 12 hours ago and you still haven't heard, and now it's 13 hours and you're pretty sure it's time to send a second email. Don't do that. The reality is like we've come to think that everything is instantaneous because it can be, but that doesn't mean it should be. And faculty have lives and families and partners and things and obligations and bureaucratic obligations, and be okay for an email to wait 2 days, but also be okay that if it's been a week, you follow up and you say, I just want to put this at the top of your inbox. I'm available this week at these times. It'd be great to talk. And if it doesn't sound judgy and it's invitational, then I think that's a good way to make sure you keep building the relationship. Because remember, this is also a huge transition process for a lot of the faculty. We have faculty members in our department who are 82 years old. Being online and on Zoom is not commensurate with their skill level as thinkers and researchers. So we all have to be a little bit respectful of each other's amateurish-niche, but in like different categories, right? So some of us are Zoom amateurs, some of us are PhD amateurs. And I think that the more understanding we can be and kind of compassionate we can be about those differences, like the more respect you're going to get back, right? So I think it's generally a good piece of advice. But if you find yourself like not being taken seriously, then that's also a strong indicator. And if you think it's a pattern, then again, that's the kind of thing that your grad chair should help you with, right? Your graduate chair should never be inaccessible, right? They should always be able to say, oh, this is a problem, right? You spent 3 weeks trying to get a hold of someone, then we're getting you a different advisor. And maybe that person's going through something awful in their life. Who knows, right? There could be very good reasons. So don't necessarily read it in that it's about you, but you shouldn't also feel guilty about getting outside help, because that's literally your grad chair's job.
So continuing on the topic that you were just speaking about, how do you navigate when maybe it's not a good fit with your faculty advisor, but you identify someone else in the department who there's a better connection with?
It's really important to remember that this is not prom. These are professional relationships and they shouldn't feel personal. And if somebody takes it personally, that is only a better indicator that they are not a good mentor. If the personalness that they take with it exceeds the boundary of merely being a little irritated to where you feel like it's vindictive, then that's also what your grad chair and your chair is for. And I think that's actually very rare. I think students have that in their head. In their head is this like soap opera of, oh my gosh, I wanted to be the student of this person who's like the most famous person in my field ever. Now I realize I don't want to work with them, but if I tell them I can't work with them, I'm pretty sure they're going to blacklist me forever, and they will like ruin my career. That doesn't happen. And in the very, very rare cases it happens, that goes much worse for the faculty member than it does for you, because that's absolutely unacceptable and unprofessional behavior. So if that's the case, if that's reality, then how you deal with it is also very simple. You just say, I took this class from this person. I really think that our work is a good fit. So I've decided to switch chairs. And that's it. It's done. What you shouldn't do is try to slide the paperwork through the office so they don't notice, and have them notice in a year they haven't heard from you and they're not on your committee anymore. Because then that feels bad, because it feels like they were hiding something, right? Just be upfront. Just tell them, I really appreciate all the work you've given me. It was a great way to start the program. I've decided that I'm going to work with this other person. And that's part of professionalization. We give people news they don't love to hear. You're going to grow up to be a faculty member or an executive or something else in a professional organization where you might have to tell someone, this isn't your best work. You're going to have to work harder at this. Sometimes you have to tell people you're not a good fit for this. And that's part of the maturation process that your mentorship should help you with. And your new mentor that you're switching to can be a resource in that. So if you have somebody who's being, I don't know, they're not having a good day, so they took it a little badly, then that's a great opportunity because of that differential in power, right? You're a student, they're a faculty member. You don't need to follow up on that, but your new advisor should, or the grad chair should. So don't worry about it. That doesn't happen often.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for one last question. You talked about trust being a fundamental component in a mentoring relationship. How honest is too honest when you're talking with your mentor about struggles that you're having, whether it's about the project, classes, outside factors, etc.?
I think that's a great question. And I have to say, again, this is one where you have to kind of judge your particular mentorship relationship. However, here's what I'll say is sort of a starting guideline. Be professional. Expect that your mentor should be able to help you get services you need. If you're having a mental health crisis, your mentor absolutely should be able to direct you, even help you find the mental health clinic on campus, right? It's a great resource. And by the way, everybody has a panic attack in graduate school. If you don't have a panic attack at least once in graduate school, you're not doing it right. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's totally normal. People, we stress ourselves out. People who are attracted to professional degrees are mostly type A personalities who want to be the best at what they do. And when they find out they're almost the best at what they do, they freak out. It's okay. But they don't need to know the details, right? So if you're not close with your mentor, you don't need to tell them about the sordid tale that led to this sort of breaking point where you really felt like you need services. But you should be able to ask them how to get services. And I think that's the way to think about the balance. Or it's something more subtle, like you're really having financial problems. They maybe don't need to know the details of your financial problems, like the status of your particular credit card. But you should be able to tell them that you are having a problem financing what is a degree program that you need to be able to finance in order to get through. And so you shouldn't expect that they're going to help you like pay off your credit card, but you should expect that they're going to help you point to opportunities on campus for scholarships, keeping an eye out for whether or not there's an extra, non-resident tuition waiver to help you get through a bleak time in between grants, or to apply for a grant. Or if absolutely it's necessary because of mental health reasons or financial reasons or any kind of personal reasons that you need a break, right? It's totally okay if things get, difficult and you need to, you can take a leave of absence, right? A leave of absence is totally legitimate during your education and normal. And they should be able to help you with all of those processes, but they're also not your therapist, right? They're not your best friend. They're your mentor, right? So they are the resource for what you need professionally and educationally. And sometimes that can be very personal because it's hard to want to step away from a program for a semester. And it can be hard to deal with the fact that it's very expensive to go to school and there's just not enough funding around. But partition as best you can. But maybe, your mentor is a really close friend and they're an opportunity. Now, the other thing that I'll say is that your mentor and or your grad chair or your chair, if there's something that happens on campus that you really need help with, I've had students who've been in domestic violence situations. I've had students who've had to deal with stalkers. I've had students who've had traumatic events. And right, we have the resources to make sure that you're safe on campus. And we should be able to provide those resources. You should always feel safe, you should always feel confident, and you should always feel welcome. And your mentor should make sure institutionally all three of those things are true. And then beyond that, they're going to try to get you to the people who can help you really feel that those things are true, if that's sort of beyond their expertise. So I hope that sort of helps. But there are definitely TMI moments.
Thank you. And on that note, I just posted in the chat box to everyone Graduate Division's webpage for selected campus resources for grad students. I know that's something we've been sharing throughout the week, but it is a important page to maybe bookmark on your internet browser so that you can connect with some of the campus resources Dr. Grove just mentioned.
Yeah, and just the last thing I'll say is it's okay if it seems hard. Grad school is a serious transition. And the reason why we need mentors is because they've been through that transition themselves. And so I think, finding mentors that have common experiences can really make a big difference. So, don't be afraid to ask for help. Like we know that it's a hard transition. We all had to do it too. So no one's going to shame you because you just like literally can't find an apartment and you're like beside yourself or whatever it is, this is the time to bring it up, and then we'll do the best we can to direct you in the right place. So good luck, everybody. Have some fun. Enjoy the first semester.
Mahalo, Dr. Grove, and thank you to everyone for submitting your questions. We appreciate all of our attendees who joined us today. Take care, and this concludes our session.